Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Matt Kushner. I'm president and CEO of Forma Futures. Been involved with the organization for the past 2 years or so. I started as chief marketing officer and became CEO earlier this year. I graduated from Elon University in 2018 with degrees in finance and accounting. After graduating, joined Goldman Sachs in the risk division, and then later transferred over into the investment banking group, specifically in healthcare. And after doing that for 2 years, so in total 4 years at Goldman, I switched over to the buy side in private equity and currently work for Brynwood Partners, which is a middle market private equity firm based in Greenwich, Connecticut. And I'm a senior associate on the team and do most of my time doing food and beverage investing. So just an overview of Forma Futures. We are a nonprofit with the goal of helping students break into the industry. When I say industry, I mean a lot of things: investment banking, consulting, private equity, sales and trading, research, you name it. Chances are, if you are studying finance or even are remotely interested in roles relating to finance and consulting, we probably have someone at PFF who works at a firm that's on your radar or is an alumni of a firm that's on your radar. We have over 150 mentors. Everyone is doing this on a volunteer basis. We're all looking to just pay it forward because we know how difficult it is to break into all these industries. And our main target audience are folks who are diverse, whether if you yourself are diverse or if you go to a non-target school. I went to Elon University, great school, similar to your school, but unfortunately we don't get the same looks to some of these logos you see on the page here that you would otherwise get from a quote-unquote target school. So what we're really trying to do here at PFF is make sure students like you have an opportunity to get a seat at the table and really get educated and understand what the day-to-day is like, learn more about the industry, and have conversations that are sometimes very difficult to have if you don't have the same path, if you don't have the quote-unquote target background. So we all know how difficult it is to, like I mentioned, get in touch with professionals in the industry, whether you go the cold outreach approach, first name, last name @firm.com, or reach out to people on LinkedIn through direct messaging, crossing your fingers, hoping for a response. It doesn't always work out. That doesn't mean that they don't like you or don't think you're worthy of having a conversation. Sometimes people are just busy and they receive a lot of inbounds from motivated students. So they just, pick randomly, or sometimes they just don't respond at all. That's where we come in. We all have our personal email addresses listed on our profiles. So for example, if you went to the team page on our website and went to my profile, you would see my bio, and I talk about how I navigated the internal mobility process at Goldman, going from risk in Salt Lake City to investment banking in healthcare in New York. So if you're someone who is looking to understand how to navigate that process, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. And I have my personal email address listed on my profile. I know that's more of a post-grad interest and situation you might find yourself in. But we do have a ton of mentors with a ton of interesting stories. And I have no doubt that you will find someone to speak with and whose bio you really resonate with and can relate to, and who you want to learn more from. But just to reiterate, all of us are doing this on a volunteer basis, but we all have our personal email addresses listed. And the point of that is to make sure your message doesn't just fall into a black hole and is never responded to. You will receive a response. So really how we help, our bread and butter is our mentorship. We're happy to have conversations with motivated students, whether you're someone who is in the exploratory phase and is really just looking to understand what career options you have based on your resume or your background or your interests generally, or on the flip side or other side of the spectrum, if you're someone who's known your entire life that you want to be a consultant or in investment banking and you just desperately need a mock interview ahead of a super day, we have those kinds of conversations as well, and everywhere in between. So no one on this call should think that they're precluded from using the PFF network based on their situation, whether you are a first year or a senior. PFF is relevant to you, and we're happy to have a conversation with you depending on whatever your position may be. We offer mentorship as our bread and butter, and that comes in the form of career guidance and recruiting prep. Like I mentioned, we do mock interviews all the time. And for example, if you are a senior and you're looking to weigh your options in terms of when offers start coming in and you're thinking about different firms, different locations, different career paths, the exit opportunities, there's a lot to consider, and it is a big decision. It's probably not the first job you'll have, but regardless, it is an important, or the last job you'll have. But it is an important decision nonetheless, and we're here to really act as a sounding board and help you through that decision-making process and really just career guidance as a whole. Our recruiting prep doesn't just stop with mentorship, and we'll talk about it more later in the presentation, but we have phenomenal learning resources on our website as well. We have behavioral interview guides, technical recruiting guides, resume templates, networking best practices. We're really a one-stop shop for all things recruiting. So really encourage you, even if you don't want to use our, mentorship side of the house and resources we offer, even though I strongly recommend you do. If you're someone who is, more introverted and just wants to laser focus, start studying for these interviews, happy for you to use that as a resource as well. Networking, I can't really emphasize it enough. It's not something that you just do to land your first role. It's something that's critically important throughout your career. And if you're someone on this call who has never really had a networking conversation and doesn't really know what that process is like and how conversations normally go, if you simply need practice, all we ask is that you come prepared and motivated and respectful and have a nice conversation. PFF is a great place to start. For example, if any of you reached out to me and had a conversation with me, some people in the industry can be intense, but no one at PFF would ever get impatient or grill you or expect you to know certain things. We're an open book, and we expect you to be too, and just be a sponge, absorb everything we have to say, and just ask provoking and thoughtful questions. So it's a great way to get used to the networking aspect of what you'll have to accomplish later on in your career. To talk about the industry overall, so the hexagons that have dotted lines here, these are the areas where PFF has the most expertise, and we have most of our mentors participate in these areas. So I'll run through these quickly because we talk about it in more depth on the next page here. But investment banking, think of it primarily as helping businesses sell themselves. You'll hear the term sell side a lot. Sell side M&A, sell side investment banking. You are selling businesses. So if an investment banker is hired by a company, they are helping that company sell themselves. There's more to it than mergers and acquisitions, which is what I just described. There's also anything capital markets related in terms of debt financing and equity financing. So a company will also hire an investment bank to raise capital, whether it be in the equity markets through an IPO or a follow-on offering, or tap the public markets for debt through bonds, or the private debt markets through term loans or other instruments that are, in the market these days. Asset management, easiest way to think about it is investing other people's money, whether it's through wealth management, working with high net worth individuals, or private credit, private equity, hedge funds. Asset management is a pretty broad term, but that's basically what that means. Equity research, the name really speaks for itself. You are conducting research on behalf of an investment bank, and the reports that you create are prepared for the clients of an investment bank. And typically in equity research, you are preparing materials on not just an industry, but are usually covering specific companies within an industry as well. So you're really developing, a thesis and developing more of that judgment muscle. Corporate finance, it's a pretty loaded term, but think about it as investment banking light is the way some people put it. You are really the in-house banking team for a corporation. So using Amazon as an example, if you are on the corporate finance team of Amazon, you are potentially helping them with strategy, selling a segment of their business, acquiring another business, raising debt, raising equity. You're pretty much doing everything I just described, albeit, those situations change depending on the company and how active they are in capital markets transactions or how acquisitive they are in the market. But that's really the easiest way to think about it, is an in-house banking team. Commercial banking and risk management, we don't have great representation from a PFF perspective, from a PFF mentor perspective, but encourage you to read more about these pockets of finance because they are relevant to you. And the reason why I say they're relevant is because, for example, I started my career in risk at Goldman. That was the way that I figured was a good way for me to break into a premier bank and later transition into investment banking. And that's what I was able to do successfully. I'll talk about it later, but it's not necessary. I'm not suggesting that should be your plan A, but it is important to understand what roles are available in banks, generally speaking, because it is a creative way to break in if you're unable to get that more coveted or sought after investment banking role right out of school. So to dive a little deeper on these topics where we have the most expertise, investment banking, the rumors that you've heard are true. It is very demanding. Your work-life balance will not be great. You can typically expect to work 80 to 100 hours, plus or minus depending on what you're working on. But par for the course is generally 80 hours a week, I'd say. Most of the time when I was working in my analyst years at Goldman, generally was logging in around 9 o'clock and was generally available until 1 to 2 a.m. is usually the way it went down. And you're typically working 6 days a week. Some banks have different policies about weekend work, but for the most part, I would dare to say most banks have you work on Sundays, and Saturdays is more of a protected day. But again, really varies depending on what bank you work for and the sheer volume of transactions they're able to participate in and advise on. Because you're working so much and because you're working on so many different aspects of just capital markets and M&A activity, generally speaking, like we just discussed on this page, and banking is a lot. And we'll talk about it more in detail on the following page, but you get such an amazing skill set, not only because of the sheer amount of work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but the exposure of work you're getting across different industries potentially and different kinds of deals. And when I say deals, I mean not just acquiring or selling businesses, but also raising debt and raising equity as well. And there's other, kinds of work you can get as well, like activism and defense work as well. There's a lot of work that goes on in investment banking that some people aren't even aware of. Asset management, it's different in that you're focused on not everything I just mentioned. It's more narrow in scope. So for example, I currently work in private equity and I have not worked on an IPO. I haven't worked on a private placement. I haven't worked on a restructuring situation. Most of my day-to-day is operating work for our portfolio companies and doing diligence on new deals, and some capital markets activity as well in terms of raising debt. But the skill set I'm getting in private equity is more narrow in scope versus what I was doing in banking. And that makes sense, right? It's the progression in terms of, banking to private equity is you start getting a broader skill set and then you work your way down. Naturally, that's how it works. And that's why most people try and get that banking experience initially for the first 2 years of their career, because once you get that 2 years of experience, the exit opportunities are incredibly vast, not only because of the work experience you're getting, but you just learn how to be a dedicated and hard worker, generally speaking. So employers understand and recognize what it means to have that on your resume. So that's really why it's as sought after as it is. Equity research, I didn't touch upon this, but in terms of asset management, it depends what firm you go to, but generally speaking, you can expect your compensation and work-life balance to be a bit better. So that's generally why the compensation is a bit lower, especially for a more junior role versus that of investment banking. Equity research, the lifestyle is better. The compensation is a bit less than banking, but you can encounter spurts of high volume work similar to that of banking, but it's not as consistent. In terms of the work you're doing, it's generally more thoughtful than banking. You're not really preparing client pitch decks that can potentially never see the light of day. You're not just working aggressively in Excel and PowerPoint trying to get as much work done as possible for a client without thinking about it, which sometimes that can happen as an analyst. In equity research, the work is more thoughtful and the work that you are preparing, it's all related to covering an industry or a corporation. So naturally, it's more of a narrative and it's more thoughtful from an analytical perspective, where again, some of the work you're doing in banking is more just doing work for the sake of work and material preparation. Corporate finance, most people, shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people actually pivot to corporate finance after 2 years of banking because the work-life balance is better. You'll see here that the first year compensation anywhere from 40 to 80,000 really depends on what firm, how intense it is, and what location you're at. But corporate finance can be strategy, it can be business development, it can be operating in some kind of chief of staff role. There's a lot of names that go into corporate finance / strategy. But generally speaking, the work-life balance is better. So naturally, you're going to be paid a bit less versus that banking. And when people say investment banking, a lot of the time they think about just mergers and acquisitions. There's actually a lot more to it than that. And everything you're looking at on this page is what is called a product of investment banking. So imagine you were a client and you reached out to me and I was Matt's investment bank. And you said, hey, Matt, I need to get involved with the bank. What can you do for me? And I'd say, oh, I'm glad you asked. Look at this page. These are all of the products that I can offer for you. If you're looking to buy or sell a business, we can advise you on that. If you're looking to go public through an IPO, we can advise you on that. Or if you're looking to raise debt through the public or the private markets, we've got you covered. Or if your business is going through or is bankrupt and needs to be restructured, whether you just want to sell it for parts or turn it around so it can be a going concern again, we can have you covered there as well. So it's important to think about the distinction between product and coverage, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But again, everything you're looking at on this page is a product of an investment bank. And it's important to understand that there's more to banking than just M&A, because as you think about recruiting, M&A advisory and leverage finance are some of the most competitive roles because they place the best into private equity. However, if you were able to get a role in equity capital markets at a bank that's reputable, that's a great offer to have. And you can always pivot later on to any of these roles internally once you prove yourself in that first role after a year or two. That's very doable and actually quite common. A lot of people after a year or two of ECM or DCM, these two groups here, will switch into banking later on because it's more attractive to recruit from banking to private equity versus ECM or DCM. So I won't touch on all of these, but I will touch on the more important roles or more common roles, I should say. M&A, we talked about buying and advising on the buying and selling of businesses. Equity capital markets, just think going public. When companies want to go public, they will hire an investment bank to walk them through that process and really build the book that is available to investors, not only on the retail side of the house, but on the institutional side of the house as well. Debt capital markets, it's raising debt. The opposite of equity is debt. Equity capital markets, equity, debt capital markets, debt. And DCM, you are raising debt in the public markets versus private, which is leverage finance. So the difference between leverage finance and debt capital markets is raising debt on behalf of public businesses. Leverage finance is raising debt on behalf of private businesses. Restructuring, think bankruptcy. If a company is going through a restructuring, most of the time it's because they are bankrupt and they need to figure out their stuff. So that's generally where the investment bank comes in and helps them, like I mentioned, maximize value through selling the pieces of the business or help them restructure and get things back on track. When a company says, I'm bankrupt, the doors don't just close and that's that. There's different ways to navigate that process creatively, and that's where an investment bank can come in. In terms of product versus coverage, so you see here, product versus coverage, this is what I alluded to earlier, and it can be confusing a bit, but the easiest way to think about it is if you're on a product team, you work on any of these products across all industries. So if you are a product team, you're a product expert and industry agnostic. So if you were on the M&A product team, for example, You will work on advising the acquisition and sale of businesses in real estate, technology, natural resources, financial institutions, you name it. Any industry is fair game, and you can advise on M&A deals for those industries. Conversely, if you're a coverage group, you are a product generalist and an industry specialist. So when I was at Goldman in healthcare, I was an expert in healthcare, but was not a master of any product. I worked on mergers and acquisitions. I worked on LBOs. I worked on IPOs, private placements, activism work, you name it. I was all over the place, but it was all under the realm of healthcare. So that's the difference between product and coverage. These banks you see here on the top right, every bank is set up a bit differently, but the point of this page is to really help you understand the difference. Well, A, just have you be acquainted with the kinds of banks out there, so you can look at these logos and see what some of the more attractive banks are to work for after graduating. But there is a difference between, you hear the term bulge bracket and boutique. For bulge bracket firms, that really just means they offer all of this stuff. So if you approach Goldman in that example and say, hey, Goldman, I'd like to sell my business, how can you help? They'll say, oh, sure, we can do M&A advisory. By the way, we also have all of this stuff as well. So you should get familiar with that and see if you're interested in any of this stuff. Conversely, Centerview, Evercore, they don't have that broad product suite. They just have, I believe both of them just have mergers and acquisitions advisory. So different banks specialize in different things, and different banks have a different setup in terms of products and coverage groups. Some have both, some have a mix of both. They're just set up a bit differently. So while you're recruiting, it's important to understand how the bank is set up. So if you have a super bank, for example, or Citi, or investment banking, through your recruiting process, you can ask the recruiter or people you know with, hey, is this for my industry, or is this for a product team? How does this work? So just something that you down the line opportunities. Not many people stay in investment banking, generally because the work-life balance is so hard. Most people pivot into any of these other roles you see down below. But if you do stick with investment banking, it is a tried and true career path. You work your way up from associate to manager. More commonly, people pivot to private equity. Kelly, you went off mute there. Is it getting pretty bad?
Yeah, it's going in and out.
I'll keep going. Well, it actually looks like it's okay now.
You are super quiet right now.
Let me 1 second. Okay. You guys hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I will go on video. It's possible that my lips won't sync with what I'm saying, but I will leave it on anyway. So,
right.
It's all good.
Down the line opportunities, like I mentioned, investment banking, you could stay and work your way up to MD. Private equity is a pretty common path people go down, similar in terms of the naming convention. You'll work your way up from associate, then MD, and then eventually partner. But every firm is kind of set up a bit differently. Some people go off and work for a hedge fund. Some people go off and do research. And from a corporate standpoint, there's a lot of different roles you can go into. So I kind of alluded to it earlier, but there is strategy, business development, chief of staff roles. There's a lot that goes into the corporate phrase generally. So the point of this down the line opportunities is to really give you a taste of why investment banking is as sought after as it is. And that's really because the exit opportunities are just so profound. It's such a valuable skill set. And again, not just because of the hard skills you're getting in modeling and PowerPoint and Excel, you just learn how to be a hard worker and people recognize that. And people like to hire people who have gone through an analyst program at a bank for that reason. All right. A lot of words on this page. And I will send this around after the fact so everyone has it. So don't worry, you don't have to take notes or anything. But the main point here is to just appreciate how quickly recruiting takes place once you step foot on campus for the first time. And the sooner you start, the better. So freshman year, and it hasn't always been this early, but over time, the timeline has just been, moved earlier and earlier as the years go on. And now we're at a point where sophomores are receiving offers for their junior summer. So the ultimate goal is and this is the ideal process, and I'm sure there's some people on this call who are freshmen all the way through seniors, and there's a different way to navigate it, whatever your position may be. But the most common career path, or the most ideal path, I should say, you get on campus, you start preparing for interviews, you learn your technical questions, you do what you can, you maintain a high GPA, you get involved on campus, you try and get an internship that's somewhat relevant to finance. It's hard to find your freshman year, but if you can find that, that's great. You get back to campus sophomore year, you know your technicals, you've been networking. Now you're networking more aggressively than you were freshman year. I think I left that out. You are doing networking freshman year in anticipation of trying to get an interview that next year as a sophomore. So you get to campus sophomore year, you continue to network, you continue to master the technicals and the behaviorals and nail down your story. And then interviews take place typically second semester sophomore year. And you are recruiting, like I mentioned, for an internship the following summer. So if all goes well, second semester, sophomore year, you get your offer and you're basically on cruise control, keep your grades up, keep your campus involvement. And once the internship comes junior summer, your main focus is just to grind it out, stay focused, prioritize work, and just do the best you can to make sure that you get a return offer to return for full time. So again, I'll send this around so everyone has it, but the main idea here is if you are interested in banking or really any of the industries I talked about earlier and where PFF has mentors, start sooner than later, because you don't want to be in a position where a few weeks or a month or two has gone by and you're kicking yourself for not just reviewing these questions 15, 20 minutes a day, not sending a few LinkedIn messages or PFF messages a week. It's important to stay on top of it. It is a full-time job. We know as a student, you're maintaining grades. You maybe have a job on campus. You're involved in clubs or business fraternities or societies on campus, and you're obviously trying to have fun as a student as well. So we know how difficult it is, and that's kind of why we're all trying to help each other out through PFF. But I'm telling you, if you start sooner, the better positioning you'll have to be successful later on, even if it's carving out 15 to 30 minutes a day. So I'll wrap it up here with just some thoughts of how PFF can help you through this process. So use PFF and do your own research to understand what roles are available to you. So just to recap, we started here, which is a very broad representation of what the finance industry is comprised of. There's a lot that goes into it. There are so many jobs that are available today, and this landscape continues to evolve on an annual basis. So it's important to just do some research, spend an hour or two just researching what roles are available, talk to your peers, talk to other people in the industry. It is time well spent, even if you spend a week just understanding what's available to you and trying to narrow down what might be of most interest to you down the line. And it's okay if you don't have a good answer to that. That's also a good excuse to go into banking because it sets you up for better exit opportunities down the line. So if you are like me and
not that you didn't care, but you just wanted to get really good work experience at a reputable firm. That's what drew me to investment banking, or the idea of investment banking later on, because I knew it would just make me a weapon in so many different aspects of the finance industry. So that's why I found it to be attractive. Start as early as possible, which we discussed. Know why you're doing it. This is super important, and we'll talk about it in a couple slides, but knowing your story is an incredibly important aspect of the interview process. It's important for two key reasons. One, your answer is simply important. If you can imagine, if everyone on this call was ready to recruit, everyone had good grades, everyone was involved on campus, everyone had leadership roles, everyone had an internship experience, that's all check the box stuff. What makes you stand out, those things do make you stand out, but what will be different from everyone else you're recruiting against really is your story and really how you carry yourself on the call. You have to assume everyone will know the technical questions and everyone answers okay for the behaviorals, but you have to have a compelling story. And I know everyone on the call is smart and wouldn't say something like, I just want to make a good living, or, my mom was in finance or something like that. The second example could be your answer, but it has to be more evolved. For example, I remember being at the dinner table every night with my parents, hearing about deals they've worked on and how exciting it was. And ever since then, that really got me doing research and learning more about banking. And that's why I really want to do it. I want to follow in my parents' footsteps. Or you see, you have to make it very personal to you and really make sure the person interviewing you leaves remembering your story and really buying into your story and believing that you really want to be here. Prepare for qualitative and technical questions you might encounter. We have amazing resources on our website, and they're curated by us. We're the ones conducting the interviews now. And like I said, we know how valuable your time is trying to juggle everything it is you have to juggle as a student. So we've really narrowed down your baseline, the stuff that you must know to be ready for interviews, and everything else after that is gravy, so to speak. Not necessary, but helpful if you can get that far. Networking, like I mentioned, and really can't stress it enough, it's super important, not just for your first job, but throughout your career. And PFF is a phenomenal place to start to get your feet wet if you really haven't, dived into the networking or recruitment scene altogether. Keep your grades up, get involved on campus, and if you can, take an intro to accounting course. This is helpful because first and foremost, accounting is the language of finance. If you go into investment banking, private equity, work for a hedge fund, you will have to be able to navigate your way around the three financial statements. But from a recruiting perspective, it's helpful to take an intro class, because if you do, you're not memorizing and simply regurgitating the answers to some of these technical questions. If someone were to ask you, walk me through the three financial statements after you took an intro to accounting course, it would be natural and it would be easy. So to the extent you can do that, we would highly recommend that. So like I mentioned, check out the learning tab on our website. We have awesome materials, and it's not just recruitment guides. It's emailing best practices, networking best practices, resume templates. We've really got you covered on all aspects of recruitment. And we also just launched, it's a little early for you all on the call, but we also launched a private equity initiative as well that has phenomenal resources there as well. These are some other helpful sites that you should certainly check out, but can't stress it enough. Highly recommend that you start with our learning materials. And I'm not just saying it because I'm biased, because I, work for PFF, but I'm saying it because I know how valuable your time is. And I want to make sure you're using your time most wisely. If this is for you, start now. Not just banking, but private equity, consulting, sales and trading. Don't kick yourself 3 weeks from now wishing you had spent 15 to 20 minutes a day, or wishing you had a phone call over the past month or so. Get started now. You will not be sorry. Learn why we did it. It's difficult to come up with a story at times, and I wouldn't recommend going right to our website and going to our learning tab and hearing the stories that we have to tell. You might get tunnel vision if you do that. Really just sit there and think for however long you need to understand why you're interested in going into this field or any of the fields we discussed. And after that, and if you really don't have a good answer, sure, go to our website and see if anything gives you, something to work with. But recommend you through your conversations, through networking, or just, speaking with friends and family, think of something that's meaningful and relates to you, and then you can refine it thereafter. Prepare for the interviews. Can't stress it enough. Unfortunately, these aren't the interviews where you can just walk into and be confident and perform. You need to be prepared. The interview processes are getting more and more intense as time goes on. So it's important to be prepared, and we have the resources that have you covered. Networking, don't just use PFF. Really use everything you have at your disposal. LinkedIn, cold outreach. I know I kind of knocked it earlier in the presentation, but this is the process where you really just want to give it your all, and all of the work that you put in now, if you do it successfully and really give it your all, will pay dividends later on. Like I mentioned, if you're someone who's a freshman who's really just getting going, if you give it all you got between now and your second semester sophomore year, you're really putting yourself in a nice position, really for the rest of your college career from a job security perspective. We just launched a Discord channel recently. For those of you who don't know what Discord is, it's really just a big group chat. We have around 70 to 80 members now. So it's a small army of students who would like responses in a 24-hour period, which is what we guarantee. Whether it's a question about your resume or going down different fields, or when should I send a thank you email after an interview, we have you covered. If you have any quick questions like that, highly recommend you join. And I'll send around after this presentation to Kelly this presentation, and also a teaser that you guys can reference for QR codes. You can join all of these things here on the page. LinkedIn, show your support. Like I mentioned, we're all just doing this on a volunteer basis, so a follow really means a lot to us. But not only that, we post job postings and an update on all of the learning materials we have available. So it's important to stay up to date and make sure you're making the most out of your involvement with PFF. YouTube, this is pretty new. We have, I think, 3 videos now. One is pretty much the presentation I just gave you, so wouldn't recommend you watch that one unless you forget something. But we do also have 2 and soon to be 3 private equity related videos as well. I know, again, we're a little ahead of ourselves, but if you are interested in learning more about private equity, what the process looks like, how to do a case study and do a model, we have you covered from that perspective as well. So I know I said a lot. Happy to open it up to Q&A, but I just want to end with, just to reiterate, all of this is completely free. The way you sign up for PFF, it's not a formal sign up process. You really just go ahead and reach out. We're happy to hear from you all. We'd love to hear from you all. Nothing really makes us happier than helping students get from point A to point B, because we know how difficult it is. So don't be shy, reach out, even if it's your first conversation, guaranteed with the amount of mentors we have. Do some research, see whose backgrounds you resonate with, and feel free to start the conversation. And if you're wondering, oh man, I really don't know who to start with, you can reach out to proformafutures@gmail.com or go to the Contact Us tab on our website, and we can do kind of a matchmaking service and get you connected with some of the mentors on our platform.